that gets to the second thing, which is the recognition that comes in 1945 that governments can have secret programs that can possibly endanger the lives of every one of us. And they can do things that would have been unimaginable, right? And then the third thing with that is also connected to it is that we have the age of big government. United States government, even 50 years earlier, if you look at what the United States government was, say, in 1900, it was a really, what you probably think about in comparison today, a Mickey Mouse affair. It was a small scale thing. You don't have this kind of massive bureaucracy and military bureaucracies, right? That changes. World War II particularly changes that. And the Cold War only really is a doubling and tripling down of that. So those three things together, I think, create the backdrop to this very clear, almost immediate, as you sort of point out, this immediate turn to when there's talk of flying saucers, the immediate turn to this is a national security issue. Who's behind this? Who's doing this? I've written an article before I published my book. But the first actually article I ever wrote on this subject was on the early 1940s, late 40s and 1950s reception of flying saucers in flying saucer reports in Germany. And that what was interesting there to see was that by and large, the German media and German people all basically thought that this must be either the United States government, that was who they thought were the likeliest people behind it, or the Russians. And so the immediate place that people went to was to basically lean into the kind of things they were familiar with, which was getting bombed by Americans or Russians, right?
Yeah, this gets to just, I think, really what you do and do well as a historian is giving this grounding of a context of the time and, you know, the collective psyche of the people at the time in all these different locations. I think it's early on in the book, and I think it is in the airship section where you talk about the first generation of folks experiencing the fear of death from above, this and the factors of rumor, xenophobia, and mechanized warfare. And this context dependent approach to trying to understand these stories, these because they're basically, as Greg Bishop has said, and others, the UFO is like a Rorschach block that we throw our unconscious and very conscious fears and expectations upon, and it's as much as you said, like a mirror for those kinds of things to understand ourselves. And I think it also, but it does also thus become prime potential territory for human agencies of all stripes to utilize for their own ends, which gets to areas that we won't go into here necessarily, but I just, again, the personalized historical analysis that you give of these different groups in different countries, I just again, it just really made me feel like I was peering through a time machine and getting a sense of what it must have been like. I mean, and it did very much mirror my own experience as being obsessed with these things. My becoming obsessed with this with the subject when I was in high school, and how right out of high school, finding a MUFON group and participating in its production of ephemera and that sort of thing. But you go back to, of course, as so many have the Ray Palmers and the connection kind of to these sci-fi clubs. You mentioned Gernsback promotion of readers clubs and science correspondence clubs, and how that came to be the model for flying saucer clubs and newsletters. But again, just the volume of your explication of this in all these different parts of the world through different parts of time really, really impressed me. Of course, towards the end of the book, you really, I was trying to go through my notes and pick out what do I want to talk about. I didn't get very far until I was like, oh my God, 1973 and onward. Oh my Lord. Like, how do I, fit all this in? But that's where it really gets, I think, really, really interesting, just because that's kind of like what the era that I grew up in, and I suspect you grew up in terms of, reading about these classic cases, but then as it was changing into this newer form with not just car chases and car stoppages and the occasional monster report, but like these close encounters of the third kind, these entity cases, and harkening back again to that UFO, that J.J. Abrams docuseries, your comment in there about the context of the rise of home invasion narratives and as a possible stimuli, for lack of a better term, for this evolution or this change. Again, not a definitive answer, but just giving that context. And I think it was really apropos. And I think the rest of the book, as you explore more deeply that deep, rich, more recent history of the abductee phenomenon, and how so much of it was influenced by, say, the likes of John Keel and others, is just really fascinating. And I remember when we spoke that you were saying, well, that's kind of where your research was going. And then more recently, there was this Aeon essay that I think really did another great job of showing that process of how we assign importance and meaning to these kinds of things, these kinds of anomalous experiences. If was it, I'm trying to remember in one of your lectures, was it the Patty Price case, or was it a different case that you opened with? I think it was your Atlas, not Obscura class, maybe.
It might have been the Patty Price case. I think that's the one that I go into a little detail with, right? That's the one with Ray Fowler, right?
Yeah.
Was that was that with Bud Hopkins? I can't recall.
Harder. I think James Harder.
James Harder's involved with that. Yeah, James Harder. Yeah, I was that without question. I completely agree with you in many ways. I mean, I must admit, I had so much fun, and I was just so fascinated by the growth of groups and organizations, and learning about some people who I hadn't known nearly enough about. So on that count, I agree with you completely. That to me, I'm glad that it stuck with you, because I really, really spent a lot of time on it and wanted to get it right. And just as an off to this side comment, I came away thinking that I think Coral Lorenzen is one of the most fascinating people in the UFO world. And now that Dave Marler and co have all that stuff, we need a biography. Somebody's going to write a good biography. She warrants a biography. But in any event, yeah. So I agree with you about the later chapters and this sort of darker turn that to me fascinates me. And I will say that it was also the one that I felt was going to be more challenging. There is something what's the term? What are the terms for it? There's because of the nature of these experiences, these encounters of the third kind, fourth kind, whatever you want to call them. They themselves are experiences that are deeply, deeply personal. They have profound impacts on people's lives, and they are themselves invasive. There's an element in which I kept thinking to myself, how do I approach this in order to appreciate that, in order to analyze